Chapter 8, Davenport Gap. On Friday, May 26, 2001, I drove to Uncle Johnny's Hiker Hostel in Erwin, Tennessee. I got to Erwin early and got a fat fix at the local McDonald's before I picked up my driver. When I parked at the hostel on the Nolichucky River, I met Johnny moving some cars around in the lot. He thanked me for being on time and asked me to come onto the porch while he called Danny. Danny, my driver, arrived in 20 minutes. We talked about many things for the next 2 hours, but I mostly listened. As we walked to my truck, Danny asked if I wanted him to drive since I'd been at the wheel for a while. I said, that would be nice. As we got into the truck, he asked, "Did you say your name is J.W.?" I said, "Yes." "My preacher in Florida was named J.W." I said, "Well, I'm a preacher too." Danny said, "That's interesting." Then I heard his story of a failed marriage, poor health, and a refreshing new start when he moved near his present wife's family in Erwin. He moved from Florida, found a new life in the mountains, and never wanted to leave. After a 2-hour drive, Danny left me at I-40 between Asheville and Knoxville, where Jeffrey and I completed our walk last July. Even though Danny, my driver, came to this location a day or so earlier in the week, he didn't seem to know the area very well. I directed him to the point of beginning, just beyond the I-40 exit. I embarked on this walk by climbing the steps to the trail. I was reminded very quickly that I was not beginning an easy walk. I walked for a half-mile and encountered a stream I had to cross to get to a road that led me back down Old Waterville School Road. If I had known, I could have ridden another mile before beginning my walk. I hiked the 8.2 miles to the first shelter, where 5 people were set up for the night. I prefer tenting. I don't impose on others. Walking into Deep Gap Groundhog Creek shelter and greeting the folks there, I realized they were not in the mood to move over so another hiker could take sleeping space in the shelter. I heard a man say, "And speaking of no etiquette," I assumed he didn't appreciate that I entered the camp so late. I diffused the situation very quickly as I erected my tent. A friend, Don Boulanger, gave me some MREs. I decided now would be an appropriate time to taste meals ready to eat. I was glad to chow down on some beef stew that needed no preparation. It would have tasted better if I had heated it, but I was too tired and late. The weather always seems to be an issue. It began raining about 2 hours into the first day of walking. The only day without rain was on my last day out, Wednesday. Though I've not adjusted well, you take the weather as it comes, attempting to adapt as best as possible. It rained throughout the night, but the rain stopped long enough for me to put up my tent on Saturday without getting wet. Few of you will believe it, but I'm a shy person. I usually stay in the background when I'm out of my environment. On the trail, everyone is a survivor. Many want anonymity. Others may probe as you converse, but usually not too quickly. When the occasion occurs to investigate, it's always interesting but not surprising that everyone has their tale for why they are on the trail. I'm fascinated by the people who trot up and down those mountains. The natural and most exciting stories are never divulged or heard, beyond the silence of the hills and valleys along that 2,170-mile, 18-inch wide trail that winds from Springer Mountain to Catad in Maine. As I lay in my tent the first night, I was close enough to hear the conversations of those who resided in the shelter. A young girl talked about making 20 to 25-mile days and encountering a rattlesnake north of Fontana Dam. She also told the southbounders that her boyfriend was trying to catch up with her, and they would meet him in a couple of days. She was the first one out of the shelter and on the trail Saturday morning. I started shortly after her, but never saw her again until Hot Springs at Gertie's 2 restaurant. Saturday, May 27th, 2001. At 8:45 Saturday morning, I met a southbound who had already traveled 5 miles, and I was on my first mile. He told me about seeing a wild turkey, her 2 biddies, and a bear. He instructed me that the secret to seeing wildlife is an early start. After a brief chat, I continued my walk, anticipating seeing some wildlife. I was greeted by another southbounder who encouraged me by describing that Max Patch Bald was gorgeous. With the carrot of a natural wonder ahead, I continued my upward climb. As I was walking across a flat area, 2 little birds ran out onto the trail. As soon as I saw them, There was a loud flutter. I immediately realized that this was the turkey the southbounder saw. She was nesting near the trail at the foot of a tree. She took a defensive position a few yards off the trail as I observed her and her biddies. I didn't linger long, but was glad to count sighting the turkey and chicks as one of my observations. As I walked into the opening of Mac's Patch Bald, I could see the vast expanse that I had read about. No one is sure about the history of this bald. Some think that the Native Americans cleared the ground for farming. It was breathtaking as I walked into the vast openness that once served as an airstrip. There were many day hikers across the bald. I met 20 or more people walking. Some were seated on the summit, eating lunch, drinking in the sun, and enjoying the beauty of this natural wonder. Across the meadow were horseback riders. I could see two white vans that I thought were related to horseback riders. When I got to the summit, a young man who passed me was seated, taking in the beauty and watching the clouds as they formed across the Smokies. He hated the Smokies because it rained on him every day. He crawled into a wet sleeping bag every night and wore wet clothes every day because of the rain. The sun he was basking in was a welcome relief, and the ominous clouds that formed threatened to take that warm and pleasant feeling away. The young man asked if I had seen Teach. I asked, "Who?" He responded to the woman from London. I said no, but she came up behind me as soon as I spoke. They asked if I wanted to stop for lunch, but I declined to move further down on the bald, bask in the sun, and eat alone. As I was packing up to leave, these two passed. I saw them again at Roaring Fork Shelter, where they told me they were making a try for Deer Park Shelter, about 3 miles from Hot Springs. I continued hiking to the Walnut Mountain Shelter 2 miles away, which was my stop for the night. As I left Mac's Patch Bald, I saw a study group doing archaeological work. They were busy digging and shifting the dirt. As I passed by, they waved, continuing their work, and I continued my walk. The two white vans I saw in the distance across Match Patch carried this study group. When I arrived at Walnut Mountain Shelter, it appeared that this would be my first night camping alone. Even though no one else was there, I erected my tent to escape the bugs, hard floors, and mice. The water source was too far from the shelter. I walked there twice because I didn't carry my water purifier, and getting the water was inaccessible. Since I arrived at about 5 o'clock, it was soon time for a delicious meal. The truth is that when hiking, I don't have an appetite. I chose one of the mountain meals that I purchased at REI. These are meals that provide the right combinations for good nutrition for hikers. I read the instructions for preparing my chicken and rice. It sounded good. I poured 2 cups of boiling water into the package and stirred it. I saw a small pack about the size of a sweet and low package that I thought was the seasoning for my chicken and rice. After I poured in the water, I stirred in the seasoning package and folded it over the top. I let it sit for 7 minutes before I ate. When I opened it, the aroma was okay. As I waited for it to simmer, I made some instant tea. When I took my first swallow of tea, it didn't taste perfect. I drank the tea from the same container I'd used for Gatorade. It didn't taste too good when I first ate chicken and rice. I noticed my seasoning had not dissolved, so I stirred it again. It tasted nasty. I saw a crunch between my teeth as I ate chicken and rice. At first, I thought it was just the effect of the trial on my appetite. Like a bolt of lightning, I reached for the emptied seasoning package. It was not the seasoning I put into my chicken and rice. As I thought, the package had marked across it, "Do not eat." I spit out what I had in my mouth and threw away the remaining chicken and rice. I had put the deoxygenizer. It's that additive that I first recall in potato chip packages, which keeps it dry. It caused me no harm, but it ruined my evening meal. I heard someone holler at night, but I didn't understand what was said. I waited, knowing that I would not be alone. Soon, a man came to the crest of the hill and dropped his pack, nearly falling on it. He said, "That's the toughest 11 miles I've ever walked." He was tired, but there were 3 people behind whom he had hollered encouraging words, so they wouldn't give up before they arrived. First, he wanted to know, "Where is the water source?" I described that it was not one of the best. He said, "I'm out of water, and if I have to dam it, I will." After our brief introduction, I learned his name was Cliff from Decatur, and he and his 3 friends were weak warriors. They left Hot Springs, Tennessee at 9 a.m. after only a few hours of sleep. One of his groups appeared to be in serious trouble. He was coughing extremely deeply. He went into the shelter to put on dry clothes. By that time, a couple of northbounders arrived. They were set up to sleep in the shelter. The man changing into dry clothes was still out of breath as he coughed. I heard him tell the new arrivals, "I'll soon be out of your way, so you want to catch what I've got." One of the young men asked, "What do you have?" He said, "I don't have anything. I guess I've never strained that much before." For some time, from their campsite on the hill above the shelter, I heard the weekend hiker coughing and heaving as if he were deathly ill. I would not have been surprised if the coroner had been called to take him away by morning. But on Sunday morning, everyone was better, and the warriors were ready to tackle another climb. It was a rainy night, but I kept it dry in my tent. The only wet spot was not the tent's failure, but the one erecting the tent. At the end of the tent, I failed to extend the rain cover by attaching the peg that stretched it over the tent to shed the water. Even though it was wet at the end, it did not disturb my sleep. It dried out quickly the next day. Sunday, May 28th, 2001. As I left camp Sunday morning, the coughing, heaving hiker gave me his best wishes, telling me that the hike into Hot Springs was 99% downhill. I quickly learned on the trail that hiking is a matter of perspective. When one feels good and the weather is good, it affects how one perceives the trail. For the weekend hikers, it was only uphill southbound to the shelter. I believed them, but they were wrong. There were many downhills, but equally as many uphill into Hot Springs. The testimony of other hikers, the posted signs on the trail, and the data books can be wrong about the difficulty of a hike. I decided not to believe anyone and not to anticipate, but to take the trail as it came. I was glad once I realized the trek into Hot Springs was not 99% downhill, so I opted to spend the night at Walnut Mountain. I believed the weekend warriors would be an easy walk into Hot Springs, but it was more difficult because I anticipated a downhill journey. One of the day's delights was meeting a couple, the Great House, about my age from Hickory, North Carolina, who were on a short hike from Max Patch to Hot Springs. A brief conversation revealed they were elders in a Presbyterian church in Hickory. They have a 9-year-old granddaughter whom they hope to introduce to backpacking shortly. When you think you've met the last nice person you'll meet on the trail just across the hill, there are others just as pleasant as the last ones you encountered. Before I left them, they told me about Hot Springs. They spent Friday night there before beginning their journey from Max Patch on Saturday. Before we parted, they offered directions and more information about Hot Springs and a Snickers bar. I never saw them again, but I cherish my brief encounter. About 3 miles before arriving in Hot Springs, I met several people taking a short hike on the trail. Each encouraged me by telling me that I was almost there. When I finally came to the parking lot at Hot Springs, I took off my bag, shoes, and socks and rested a while, soaking up as much of the sun as possible. Since I didn't have information about Hot Springs, I didn't realize that the trail went down Main Street. I walked out of the way but found a Coke machine where I had some relief. I sat in an old building, drinking my 7-Up gratefully. Why 7-Up? Because that was the only drink left in the machine. I opted for a longer route to reach the town and eventually located a store where I inquired about directions to the hiker hostel. The locals directed me to the Jesuit house, but I learned from other sources that it was closed. Then I asked for Elmer's. He said, "There is Elmer's," pointing to an old colonial house. I saw other hikers and a young man carrying a carton of beer with various rings piercing his body. He heard me ask about Elmer's and said, "I'm going there. I will show you." His toes were painted blue, like those of a young man I met at Deep Gap Ground Hog Creek Shelter. He told me he had camped several nights near the river, but was spending the night with friends at Elmer's. I believe his friend also had blue toenails and fingernails. He carried me to the back door. I put down my pack and opened the screen door that led me into the kitchen. A young girl and a woman in her 40s were busy preparing dinner. I asked if they had a room. At first, they said no. Then they said, "We can put him in the room with Weasel." I thought, I've slept with mice, bugs, and mosquitoes. Why not a weasel? She ushered me on a house tour, pointing to the only shower, the reading room, and the music room. The house is ancient in its appearance and smell. It reminded me of my Grandpa Wallace's house. Then she carried me into a bedroom with a large double bed and a small bed. She assured me that Weasel was a good man and would be a good roomie. She wanted to take me upstairs, but I declined because I did not want to walk another step upward. A gray-bearded gentleman came in as she left me to do my chores. She introduced me to him. I gave him my name, and he quickly asked, "What did you say?" He told me he would be a great partner because he couldn't hear. Therefore, I wouldn't disturb him. Weasel went on to say that he wouldn't disturb me because he did not snore. Further, he said, "If you got something on your mind that you want to scream about, go right ahead. It won't bother me, and you can get it off your chest." Meeting Weasel is one of many pleasant memories of this walking section. Just as interesting as the man Weasel is, how he got his trail name. He began chatting on the internet with a man named Joe Talent. When he learned that Russ Boltz was a lawyer, he began referring to him as one of those weaseling lawyers. Russ is not easily offended by lawyer jokes. I didn't try any of mine on him because I think he's heard most of them. Russ, aka the Weasel, is from Michigan. He was recuperating from tendonitis in his ankle. He has been fraught with numerous setbacks, including a broken tooth while on the trail, and double hernia surgery 2 weeks before leaving. He told me he was 10% lighter than when he began, but assured me he had plenty left for his walk. Our bedroom had a door that opened onto a porch with chairs and benches. The gentle breeze was pleasant as it swirled into the room like natural air conditioning. Weasel and I had exciting conversations about Georgians and the mountains of North Georgia, which can be dreadful for a hiker. Russ had been in Hot Springs for a few days. He assured me that one could walk to everything in Hot Springs in 5 minutes and knew everything going on there, even though he was temporary and had a short time in Hot Springs. He told me that this hostel was great. He liked being there even though he missed his wife. Russ said, "There's a couple you've got to meet. T and T, aka Tom and Tricia, work at the local restaurant Gertie's 2. Like many hikers, I assumed this couple was working their way up the trail. Russ said, "I'll introduce them to you later because you will be hiking with them tomorrow." Russ and I shared stories, philosophy, and religion before we parted ways. I learned several pithy things from Russ. We have to teach our children that time is not a magazine and weather is not a channel. He also stated that the worst 4-letter word takes 3 letters to spell. It is a gap because you know you will have a significant asset in or out of the gap. When I first arrived at Elmer's, I signed up for dinner at 8 o'clock. After showering, I realized I was hungry and wanted to be in bed about the time they served dinner. I bowed out of dinner and asked Russ for a place to eat. There were a few choices. I decided between a pizza at the local service station or a dinner at Gertie's 2. I decided on Gertie's 2. It's one of those forgotten places long remembered, where you experience the heart of America. Russ was right. I was at the restaurant in about 5 minutes. As I walked in, people lined up at the front waiting for ice cream. I wasn't sure it was a sit-down restaurant until I saw several tables cluttered with dirty dishes. I spotted a clean table where I deposited my weary bones and clean body. Things were so busy that there wasn't enough help. I got a menu from the dish-laden table nearby and began my selection process. Eating and drinking on the trail haven't been easy to regulate. I had not eaten much that day. I knew that I must eat something that would supply me with energy. I selected the chopped sirloin despite seeing leftover remnants on the dishes beside me. I waited for the server who slowly came to my table. I ordered sweet tea. I needed the tea more than the chopped sirloin. The menu stated, "Unlimited refills," which suited me fine. Eventually, I got my tea and the server took my order unhurriedly. As the server left the table to fill my order, I noticed the Gertie's 2 mission statement on the wall. It stated, "I promise to serve you a quality meal if you are patient." They lived up to her promise, and I agreed to be patient. I got a delicious plate with French fries and chopped steak that went down slowly. I'm not usually a slow eater, but I had to eat slowly on Sunday to get it down. Something about the demands of trail walking takes away my appetite. I enjoyed watching the people wait to pay for their meals and get ice cream cones and their meals. A gentle breeze blew through the window beside my table, cooling the restaurant and me. After a delicious meal, I walked back to Elmer's. I stopped at the nearby store where 2 payphones were out front. Earlier, as I walked to dinner, I called home and talked with Jody, but Willin was not home. But this time, when I telephoned, Willin was there, and I got to speak with her. She followed the weather, indicating it was clear in Hot Springs, and the promise of clearing conditions for several days. As she told me that the forecast was clearing, I was looking at a thunderhead forming. The weather is regional, but it is also local. It was comforting to talk with Willin. When I showered, I put my shirt, socks, and shorts in the shower. After I dried off, I squeezed the water out of my clothes and put them outside to dry. When I returned from Gertie's too, Weasel was sitting on the porch reading. He said, "I'm sure no one would mind you hanging wash on the clothesline," which I did. After more talk with Weasel, I brought in the washing, organized my pack, and went to bed to rest my weary body. When I went to bed, I heard the bell calling all the dinner guests to the table. I said my goodbyes to Weasel because I thought I would leave before he woke up. Before I got to sleep, Weasel came to tell me he was calling home, to tell his wife he missed her. When he returned from calling home, Russ told me that his wife checked the weather on the internet and that it was clear for Hot Springs and Erwin, Tennessee. That was good to hear. As I contemplated sleeping, someone played a flute in the music room. It must have been soothing, because that was the last thing I recall hearing until the break of day on Monday. Weasel was awake, so we had more conversation. Before I left, he said to be on the lookout for T&T. Weasel said, "I envy you because you will get to hike with them today." He also asked me to throw a couple of rocks off the mountain. He said, "If all my friends will do that, I'll not have to climb as far." Monday, May 29th, 2001. Early Monday morning, May 29th, I parted Elmer's out of my bedroom door onto the porch and through the backyard gate. I knew the trail went down Main Street, and that's where I headed. For breakfast, I got a Coke from the nearby convenience store. I finished it before I got beyond a trash can. I headed across the railroad tracks, where the crossing arms were coming down, and the bells sounded as I hurried across. I proceeded to the local service station pizza place, to the bridge across the French Broad River. As I crossed the river, I saw the double white blazers indicating an intersection in the trail. I passed by because I couldn't see where the trail began. As I proceeded up the trail, I saw no other markings, so I returned to the double markers, where I looked closer. There were stairs down to the level of the river. I took those stairs that led down to the river level, where the trail made its way by nearby residences along the east side of the river. I walked close to the river for 100 yards until it turned northeast and upward. It was a steep climb, but a pleasant one. For some time, I could look over my shoulder to see all Hot Springs and then some. It was a beautiful view of the river and the town. As I neared Old Mill Pond, I was passed by a slack hiker on his way there. He was an experienced hiker who brought some friends to this section of the trail. It was an idyllic setting. I waved to a couple of men drinking coffee across the lake as they drank in the area's beauty. Just beyond the Old Mill Pond, I met a thin, gray-haired man. We exchanged greetings. He told me he and his son had walked part of the trail last year. He had recently retired and was walking sections of the trail as he wanted to. Soon after, I frightened a mother grouse from her nest near the trail. Once out of her nest, she began clucking but didn't move far away. I'm sure she was protecting her territory. At about 2 o'clock, I reached the Spring Mountain Shelter. I was tired but had thought about walking another 9 miles to Little Laurel Shelter, but the weather looked threatening. I prepared a hot meal and enjoyed being there by myself. Just as I was finishing my supper, it began raining. I decided that this was enough for today. After a couple of hours of being alone and reading from the trail journal, I heard someone coming. As this tall, thin man came into my view, he asked, "Are you JW?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Russ told us that we would see you." As his wife came into view, he said, "I'm T, and this is my wife, T. We are T and T." They put down their packs, and a delightful, short, meaningful relationship began. Very soon after talking with T and T, I saw why Russ wanted to spend his days walking with them. Mr. T recently retired from a Navy job as an engineer. They own a 180-acre farm in Indiana with horses, sheep, llamas, and sometimes cows. They live in an old farmhouse that they are remodeling. They have 3 grown children. I said, "Russ told me you worked at Gertie's too yesterday." Mrs. T said, Yes, we were going to worship service at a local church yesterday, but Gertie needed some help. She said, if we had been like the Pharisees, we would not have helped her and gone to worship. All the time, I thought T&T were hikers working their way on the trail. But this is what happened. T&T went to Gertie's too for breakfast, as did about 20 others. They were waiting at the door when Gertie opened. Before Gertie let anyone in, she told them her help hadn't come. She welcomed everyone, suggesting they choose the breakfast bar since she had most of it prepared. Once they got in, several asked if they could help Gertie, including T&T. They began serving coffee. After they finished their breakfast, Gertie's help had not arrived. T&T asked if they could assist her. She put them to wash dishes. Mr. T said, I'm an old Lion Club member. I know how to cook pancakes. Soon, Gertie had Mr. T cook and clean. Mid-morning and early afternoon, she came to work. Once, Gertie and her helpers had things in control. T&T returned to Elmer's, where they were staying. T&T got a late start this morning because Gertie insisted they come for a meal for their pay for coming to the rescue. They couldn't go on Sunday evening for a meal because Mrs. T was in the kitchen at a nearby hiker hostel, baking a birthday cake for another hiker. This story gives insight into the character of T&T. Now I know why Weasel was jealous that I was walking with them on Monday. This was the beginning of a close encounter with some good humans that was all too brief. I soon learned that T&T are American Baptists. Mr. T served on several pastor search committees. I bedded down at Spring Mountain Shelter with T&T. The entries in the shelter journal promised that the mice were active there. The mice began scurrying across whatever they wanted about sundown as we tried to sleep. I heard the mice throughout the night, but was not bothered by them as much as Ms. T. I left the shelter before T&T Tuesday morning, but I knew they would pass me along the way. We had all our stuff scattered on the table where we ate and organized our pack. As soon as I was packed up, I bid T&T goodbye with the promise of seeing them up the trail. The data book indicated a country store at the Allen Gap. I was counting on some Vienna sausages and crackers from the shelves of this promised oasis. Unfortunately, the county line store was closed. I recalled that I had roasted beef MRE. When I returned to the trail, I put down my pack in the sunshine. I retrieved the MRE roast beef, which was delicious. Vienna sausage wouldn't have tasted any better. T&T came across the road as I finished my brunch. I broke the sad news that the store was closed. Mr. T said, I think I've got something that belongs to you. I had left my water purifier on the table. I can't express how grateful I was. Again, it is a reminder of the good character of others. Each time I drank water afterward, I offered a prayer of thanksgiving that Mr. T was thoughtful enough to bring my purifier. I soon got on the trail, knowing I would again be overtaken by T&T. Even though Ms. T was nursing shin splints, she walked much faster than I did. It was a pleasant walk to Little Laurel Shelter. A short hike after leaving Allen Gap, I met two southbounders who had walked from Little Laurel Shelter. They were section hikers. They walked up as I told them, Mr. T saved my day by bringing my purifier. After a few short exchanges, I stepped aside so T&T could get ahead. At about 1 o'clock, I came to Little Laurel Shelter, where T&T were in a colorful conversation with an older man, at least in his 70s. Mr. T introduced me as JW. I told her that I go by the trail name, Hobab. The gentleman was a nomad from Virginia. He had been on the trail for 10 weeks, but had also walked many other paths. I asked for directions to the water source. I walked downhill a couple of 100 yards, where I found a spring-fed water source to get my giant bag of water quickly. I got enough for us all in gratefulness to T&T that I had a water purifier. I listened as Nomad told of his trail adventures. On the northern section of the trail, he fell headfirst, severely cutting his forehead on rocks. He had a scare that gave witness to his story. When he fell, he was 18 miles from a medical source. Another hiker, trained as a Boy Scout first aid, walked with him until they reached the nearest town, where he went to the hospital. There was no fracture, but it was too late for stitches. He put his finger on the deep scar on his forehead. It left this jagged scar. I guess my modeling career's over, he said. Nomad told me about going into a town after a very grueling hike. He took his clothes to the laundromat and entered the drugstore to fill a prescription. It was gone when he reached for his wallet to pay for the medicine. He was very distressed. He reported to the local police that his wallet was lost and called his sister to pick him up. He said, "I explained what happened to my sister. I told her to go ahead and arrange for me to enter an assisted living program because I can't take care of myself. But fortunately, someone found his wallet. They took his cash, but left his credit card and other valuable information." Nomad was a strong, independent person who reflected deeply on life. T&T headed out first because I knew they would overtake me quickly. On the trail to Jerry's cabin, I disturbed another mother grouse protecting her little ones. I came across a side trail that was Jerry Miller's trail. It was a second choice for traveling to Jerry's cabin, but the sign indicated it was more complex than the one I was on. I was already trail challenged, so I stayed on the White Blaze Trail. It was a long, tough day, but my pack was getting lighter and my destination nearer. When I arrived, I met Mount Man, who arrived at the Jerry Cabin shelter, southbound, at about 4 o'clock. I selected a site to put up my tent. It appeared that it would be a clear night. At first, T&T would sleep with Mount Man in the shelter. Soon after I went to bed, I heard T&T erecting their tent, which meant they didn't want to fight with the mice another night. I listened to Mountain Man tell his story of being drawn to the trail. He was a cancer survivor and retired for a year from a stressful management job. Something was intriguing about the trail. Mount Man was married with grown children and grandchildren. He enjoyed his family in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. His last stop was Hot Springs. That would conclude his 3 weeks on the trail for this year. He would catch a ride into Asheville, North Carolina, rent a car, and then drive home. I had another restful night. On Wednesday morning, I left northbound before Mount Man left southbound, or T&T northbound. I thought that I would see them again. Mount Man told me several places where the trails were not marked. When I got to the Big Butt Mountain, I missed the trail. After walking for some time, thinking I was on the trail, I came to a road with gentle switchbacks, as anticipated. When I walked too far on the wrong trail, I realized the safe thing to do was to follow the road and find my bearings. I didn't know if I was walking deeper into or out of the woods. There were recent tire tracks that led me to believe I was headed in a safe direction. I forded several creeks. My shoes and socks were wet most of the time. My feet began to blister in several places. They were tired and sore. I started thinking about what I would do if I didn't find a way out of the woods before nightfall. I thought of building a fire and hoped to be arrested for creating an illegal fire. As I walked along, thinking about the mess I had gotten into, I was startled by something on the roadside, just a few feet to my left. I realized that it was a bear. I could have touched him with my walking pole. My feet started moving away from the bear before my mind told me you shouldn't run from a bear. I'm glad my feet weren't listening when instructed not to run from a bear. In a fleeting moment, so many thoughts come to your mind. I remembered the newspaper article I left on my desk at home. It reported the death of a woman just weeks earlier, who was allegedly killed by a black bear in the Smoky Mountains. When I got about 20 yards from the bear, he saw me. He looked at me but made no move in my direction. When I saw him move away from me, I got brave enough to strike my walking poles together. When I did that, he dashed away from me up the hill. After that encounter, I frequently banged my poles together as I walked. After that experience, I reflected on the African American song about the preacher and the bear. The words are, "The preacher went a-hunting. On one Sunday morning, according to his religion, he carried along his gun. He shot 12 partridges. On his way to the fair, and he got down the road a little further and spied a big grizzly bear. Well, the bear stood up in the middle of the road. The preacher dropped to his knees. He was so excited that he climbed up a tree. The parson stayed in that tree. I think it was all night. Then he cast his eyes to the Lord in the sky, and these words were said to him. "O Lord, didn't you deliver Daniel from the lion's den? Also, brother Jonah, from the belly of the whale, and when the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace sent, O Lord, please me do spare. But Lord, if you can't help me, please don't help that bear. For a moment at least, I forgot about my dilemma. The adrenaline was pumping. I was ready to go somewhere. I kept walking until 1 o'clock. I had been walking for 5 hours when I finally came to a paved 2-lane road. To the right, I was downhill, and to the left, it was uphill. I decided I might as well take the uphill route, the way my day went. I reached the top of a hill where the sun was shining. At the top of the mountain was the Higgins Cemetery. I could see a new house with barns and a small trout pond. I was tired and didn't know where the road was going. I decided that at least I was near civilization. I waited, hoping that someone would come by. I heard a vehicle. It was a UPS truck, but the big brown didn't stop. I attempted to stop him, but he paid me no attention. I waited for it to return. I thought this was a dead-end road, but the truck never returned. I could hear a logging crew in the distance. I left my heavy pack at the cemetery while walking to the house. When I got near the house, I could see the logging crew. I walked into the sight of the operator of the loading equipment. He shut down the machine and listened to my story. I asked him about the places where I was to travel, but he didn't know any of them. Then I wondered about Erwin, Tennessee. He said, "This is Erwin." I asked, "How far is Erwin?" He said, "About 4 miles. He said, "If you wait, this truck will leave in about an hour." I told him that if the driver saw me walking, he would pick me up. I returned up the hill to Higgins Cemetery to get my pack. I paid my respects to the residents and began what I thought was a 4-mile trip to Erwin, Tennessee, where my truck was waiting for a driver. As I walked the small 2-lane road, I encountered dogs everywhere. Hunting dogs in their cages were ready to get at me. Then, I rounded a curve when a little dog ran toward me. I raised my trekking sticks to strike him. When his owner saw my dilemma, he came after the dog, ensuring he didn't bite me. He was working on his tractor. He wanted to talk, and I wanted to walk. He offered me a cold 7-Up. I learned that he once lived in Marietta, and his brother lives in Henry County. It was a brief but fun encounter. He apologized for not having his truck to take me into town. I thought he burst my bubble when he informed me that Erwin was about 12 miles away rather than 4 miles. I groaned. I lost some pride when I finally reached Highway 372, the road into Erwin. After walking a mile, I began holding out my thumb as cars approached me. I remembered the days as a teenager when thumbing a ride was my only means of transportation. Several cars and trucks passed by without slowing down. Then a truck passed me, but came to a screeching halt. I ran to the car as fast as possible before he changed his mind. I quickly took off my pack, threw it into the back of the vehicle, and volunteered to climb. "No," the man said, "you get up here." I thanked him profusely. He was the stereotype of a Tennessee hillbilly. He was wearing overalls, several teeth missing, and he spoke with a twang. He said, "I don't pick up those long-haired young hippie-looking hikers. But when I passed you, I noticed as I investigated my mirror that you looked old, so I changed my mind." I assured him that I was grateful for his change of mind. As we talked, I told him that I went by my initials JW. When I said that, he told me his preacher's name was JW. I told him, "Well, I'm a Baptist preacher, so I hope that doesn't hurt." He said, "No, I attend the Church of God. There's not much difference between Baptists and the Church of God." I didn't argue the point. He was silent for a minute, then said, "I'm one of those regular Church of God, not one of those snake-handling kind." When we got near my destination, I thanked him profusely. I told him I would perform the ceremony at no charge when he wanted to marry. He assured me that with his past marriage history, he wouldn't be taking me up on my offer. He dropped me off within a quarter of a mile of my destination. I began walking on my tired legs and sore feet. My feet had prominent blisters below my toes across the foot. It was painful to walk a short distance. I walked about 100 feet when another pickup truck stopped. The girl driving asked me if I wanted a ride. I didn't hesitate. I threw my pack in the back, climbed aboard, and enjoyed the cool, brisk air as we motored into Uncle Johnny's. It didn't bother me that she and her woman were smoking. They had tattoos on their arms and seemed relatively carefree for some unknown reason. but I probably could make an educated guess. When I got off the short ride to Uncle Johnny's, I threw my pack onto the back of my truck as I walked by. When I got my keys and settled my bill, I had credit because I returned 2 days earlier than I paid for. The credit was just the right amount to purchase a bath. So I took a shower at the hostel. I called Willeen and left her a message that I was going home. I pulled in for a fat fix when the golden arches were in view. It reveals how my body grows a hamburger and french fries after walking in the mountains for a few days. I called Willen again when I got to Greenville, South Carolina. By the time I reached Greenville, getting out of the truck was exceedingly difficult because my body was getting stiff and sore. I arrived home at 10:30, grateful for the time away on the trail,